So welcome. This is John Dupuy.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
It's an honor and pleasure to be here. And I've known Scott for, I don't know, quite a while before he had his center going. And we talked a few times. I think I've interviewed Scott a couple of times, or he interviewed me. I kind of forget how that goes. But anyway, so I know Scott and his work. And anyway, it's great to be here.
Well, thanks, John.
All right. Well, what can I say about myself? Anyway, my name is John Dupuy, and I'm the author of the book, Integral Recovery, A Revolutionary Approach to Treating the Treatment of Alcoholism and Addiction. And I've been working in the field of recovery for a long time. And I started out working in wilderness programs and being a guide. And then I designed programs for people that were suffering from addiction and alcoholism to take them on therapeutic journeys in the wilderness. And one thing led to another. I was not satisfied with what passed for treatment at the time. So I started working on it. In the process of working on it, I found I was working on myself. And the things I was recommending for my students, lo and behold, started healing me, the practices. And one thing led to another. I wrote some papers that were published in various journals that got attention. And then I got the inspiration, maybe you're supposed to write a book about this. And I said, but God, I'm not a writer. I can't do that. And he said, oh, come on, you can. So I said, okay. And I did. And it was an amazing experience. And the book was a great book. I'm kind of shocked when I read it. I wrote that. It's one of those things. And when we get into this flow of creativity, things just come through us. It seems to be, beyond our normal kind of egoic intellectual capacities. And anyway, it's been ongoing for some years now, and check it out, Amazon. And recently we started a podcast, The Journey of Integral Recovery, which has been so much flipping fun and inspirational. We get on there with our guests, and there's two other, Dr. Bob Weathers and Douglas Prater, and we discuss these things, and the flow gets going. And it just seems that there's something really that wants to come through and just shine a new light or fresh waters on the old subject, of recovery. It's just, after a while, it's so stale and it's such a bummer, and it can actually lead people to relapse and use more. And the worst part of it. And obviously there's been some really good and heroic stuff done also. But I think it's time for fresh vision and new eyes and looking at it and doing it in a different way. Because, when AA came out, and this is an introduction, right, to myself, in the 30s, it was wonderful, and it's still wonderful. I mean, it's been something, it's not a cult, people aren't making money, and it's people getting together to help each other. However, we've learned a lot about a lot since it was written. And because of the nature, sometimes AA is not quite open to that. So it kind of gets, stuck in itself. And some people can't wrap their heads around AA and the whole God stuff and a lot of things. And so we've looked for new pathways. And for AA, we would say, I would say, look, we don't want to, discount anything you're doing. What you've got really well, but we want to add stuff to update it, make it better. So that's kind of the spirit of kind of this integral approach. It's like acknowledging what is there and what works and building on that foundation. So that's been my work over the last, 15 years or so.
Oh, that's great, John. The introduction and what your work is, the book and the podcast and all of that work. Could you talk a little bit more about how you work with individuals who are in recovery? What does that look like to take all of those principles? I know that you're involved with iAwake Technologies, which is brain entrainment, and then the integral recovery principles. So how does that all work in practice?
Well, yeah, I mean, it just depends, Sometimes I'm contacted by a family. And by the way, I'm not doing counseling or coaching right now. I'm running iAwake, and I'm writing and doing a bunch of things, but I do have colleagues who are actually doing that. So if that's what a client needs, we have integral recovery coaches who can work with them via the internet. So basically, it's very similar to standard treatment. I mean, you get a family that calls you, and it depends what level of addiction the person is at. Now, oftentimes I've worked with professionals who are, in their 40s or maybe their 50s and have accomplished a lot in their lives and are starting to lose their stuff to drugs and alcohol. And they, we talk, and I said, well, okay, if you want to work with me, we'll meet twice a week and we'll do the practices. And if that works, fine. Now, that's not enough. You need to go to some place where you're held and away from drugs and alcohol. We'll figure that out. But right now, let's work with it. And I've had a lot of success with that because they've understood, discipline. They understand what they have to lose, and they do a pretty good job. And there's some maturity there. With young people, there's often a different story. It's so much in the beginning, this kind of work online doesn't work so much. They often need to go to a treatment center and be away from things and have that supportive context. And then when they come out, we can set up a program where they get coaching and counseling. And of course, in my work, the main thing to get going first is the practice. Not just about talking or being a guide or a therapist. I mean, it's all of that. There's accountability. There's all the things that having a coach are really good for, but it's the practice. It's a practice. It's a practice. And I call it integral recovery practice. And I'm writing a book right now. I wrote the book Integral Recovery. And when I was writing that, not only did I understand, but it's not just the addict that suffers from the disease of addiction. Of course, it's everyone who's in contact with them, especially those who love them, or children are dependent on them, or wives. It's just devastation and suffering for everyone involved. So I would be recommending the healing stuff for the practices, not only for the addicts, the identified patient, as it were, but for everyone. And so as I wrote the book, and I'm the CEO of iWake. I don't know if you know this. I hate people that say it. Anyway, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. So I started, that was a part of my own healing process and my work with addicts, was this binaural brain entrainment technology. You listen to sounds, it takes you into very deep meditative states almost immediately in the first couple of minutes. So people can have a very deep transformative meditative practice like immediately, and they start feeling the results. Whereas with traditional meditation, oftentimes it takes a long time to start feeling results with people who are in active addiction. You don't have the time to wait for 5 years to start feeling the effects. So I began using that technology, and then I had the opportunity to build a company where we're doing what we think is the best version of it. Really updated in a really powerful evolutionary way. So what was the question again?
So you've done a good job of answering the question, actually.
Yeah. So you get the students, whether it's in a residential setting, it's the practice. And the practice basically consists of, there's 4 parts that we've identified. Back in the 80s, Goldman wrote a book called Multiple Intelligences. And since that, we've expanded that. And there's more than just emotional intelligence or intellectual IQ intelligence. There's culinary, there's meditative, there's musical, there's writing intelligence, all these different capacities. It's pretty intuitive. But we found that there's 4 foundational capacities that you got to work with in a practice, ongoing practice from the rest of your life. And this is whether you're an addict or not. Okay. And that's a big statement, but let's look at it. First of all, it's the body. Okay. You have to have a strong body. It means exercise, rigorous exercise. Some authors say you get to your 10 every day. It's when you're breathing hard and you can't talk and you're sweating and your body's pumping. Bam, things change. Your brain chemistry and your body responds to that. So we want to become lifetime athletes. And in the beginning, if you haven't done that, it's like, oh, I can't do that. But with support and encouragement, we can get there soon. The second thing, we have to work the mind. Okay, we have to, intellectually, we have to learn about wisdom and read the great books, listen to the teachers, and give us an intellectual framework that will hold all this and that keeps evolving to meet, this really rapidly changing world that we live in. So that's the second part, the mind. The third part is the emotional practice, and that deals with your emotions moment to moment. It deals with your PTSD, your trauma from the past, which is often, in probably more cases than none, directly led to people using in the first place, trying to treat their trauma and the pain that they're going through, self-medicating. And it also deals with your shadow issues, because if you don't deal with that stuff, it's also another issue that will cause continued suffering and also relapse and death, etc. So, and part of the way that we deal that is using this technology, using the meditative tools. You find that you can really go down, and unlike traditional meditation, which sometimes can be a dissociative process, you can see this thing, but you're not really connecting. This technology, interesting enough, really grounds it in the body. And when I was going through my own healing process, I found that it was so somatic. This stuff I had to bracket the thoughts about the trauma, because sometimes it would keep me stuck, or say, no, don't look at this. It's too much. You'll get lost in it or whatever. You deserved it or blah, blah, blah. Okay, thank you for sharing. And it would come out through the body in very powerful somatic ways, both in the physical body and the subtle energetic body. And that's essential because that frees you up. There's a lot of energy that is tied up, essential life energy is tied up in holding these things in the unconscious or in the dungeon, and they don't stay in the dungeon. They come out, and grow in the front yard in all kinds of creepy ways. They can somatically get you sick with cancer and heart disease and blah, blah, stress-related stuff or
So, excuse me,
yeah.
How does your technology help deal with trauma?
Okay, well, when interestingly enough, it's very individual, but as you begin to very rapidly get into these deep meditative states that the technology, the sounds take you into, okay? I could get into a conversation, basically how that does it, but I'll just go to the other part. You begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, these tight kind of egoic barriers that kept all the stuff in the basement begin to open up. And things begin to emerge, things from the past, feelings, you begin to be aware of stories about yourself, this is why you suck and why you'll never accomplish anything and why you deserve to die and blah, 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 that you weren't even aware of, just kind of unconscious stories that you made about yourself, about the nature of reality that are really dysfunctional and pathological. And, at that point, we can begin to restructure new, more truthful and more positive stories. So it's
the technology allows it to bubble up. And then are you saying the coaching, then that gives you material with which you coach the client?
Well, the actual release happens while they're in doing meditation. Of course, not only do you need the powerful technology, but it really helps to have coaches and teachers that tell you how to use it effectively. Like if you were in medieval times and I showed up with a Ferrari at your door, you go, wow, that's pretty beautiful, but what the heck do you do with it? You have to be taught how to use the technology. And after a while with practice, we become more and more skillful with how to, use the technology. Just like, if you're playing tennis, you become much more skillful with a tennis racket over, years of practice and putting it in there. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
So using the technology properly with whatever the coaching you need to get good at the technology, you're saying that it allows the trauma material to come up and also helps resolve it?
Yeah, well, it actually transmutes it or releases it. And at the same time, because you're in this deep meditative process, your observer self, one of the things they talk about in traditional meditation is also happening. So if you're just releasing this stuff without this kind of ability to stand outside of it, yet totally be rooted in it at the same time, can be scary as hell, and you might not do it. So as you're able to kind of, expand your sense of who and what you are and stand outside of the drama and the trauma of your personal story, these things and we can release these things more effectively because we're not just a prisoner within the own little, our ego structure, our own body.
So you could say that it strengthens the observing self that
Absolutely,
stands separate. Okay.
And mindfulness, when I first started doing this, working with students, after about 2 weeks, we'd meditate 2 hours a day, which was like amazing, like addicts right off the street, sitting there, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. And I think it was because the technology was so powerful, it just, it keeps you there doing the practice. But they would just start exhibiting mindfulness, expanded sense of self, without even being taught about it. It was just emerging from the practice, which I found really interesting. And then later on, as I got better, we talked about it more, and it was part of the work we were doing.
Very interesting. Do you see people with ADD and how the technology works with ADD or ADHD?
Yeah, ADHD it's a blessing or a curse. And who was it? Tom Hartman, he wrote a book, saying that the ADHD was more the hunter-gatherer type of mentality that our earlier ancestors need, constantly scanning and and that the non-ADHD was more the farmer, the agriculturalist mentality, row by row, plant the seed, plow the row. And so ADHD can evolve into a gift, okay? And what this technology does the brain starts functioning at a much higher level. There's a lot of things that happen. The left and right hemispheres start working together in more coherence. The neocortex is expanded. I mean, there's a lot of physical things that happen. There's an increase in serotonin and dopamine and some of the CRF and cortisol, the stress-related neurochemicals that are about anxiety and stress and relapse begin to go down. There are a lot of things that are happening. And we found that most people just become better, versions of themselves. And like my depression, I just suffered from life-crippling suicidal depression. My brother committed suicide. It was, we're talking about not just being bummed out, but being crushed by the darkness. And actually, over the years of practice and work, has become my greatest gift. It's where I found God, if you will. It's where I found my deepest spiritual breakthroughs and understandings. In the darkness itself. And so now, and I consider myself a depressive. It's not like I'm just happy all the time, but I've learned that when it begins to come on, I become very conscious with it, and I meditate, I stay with it. And, instead of, holding me down for months or weeks, usually maybe a day or a half a day. And, there's an old saw that says, if a guy says he's enlightened, ask his wife. Okay. Well, I don't think she'll say I'm enlightened, but she does acknowledge the great transformation, the difference from my old depressive, despairing self who was just about to die to who I am today. It's made a tremendous difference.
Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
Well, I was just going to back up to what you were talking about with the trauma and the practice of I Awake and the deep meditation states. And it's certainly consistent with our experience and what Scott does at the center, that people have a real fear of being in their body with the energy that's in their body.
You bet.
And that fear can't be overcome by anything other than the direct experience that it's okay. They're going to survive that.
Absolutely. Well, when I was just I'm writing another book, and it's applying all these things we learned about integral recovery and practice to everybody, right? Because we all have issues. We may not be addicts, but trust me, even the president has issues. Can you believe that? Anyway, let's not get on that one. But so I was writing that, and when I first started this, I had my first week of using this meditation, and I'd been what I call God haunted my whole life. I'd had this big experience of, God is love and love is God when I was 11 years old, and reading, Sermon on the Mount and this little New Testament. And I didn't have any guidance for it at the time. But anyway, I've had these bits and experiences of God. And, when you experience God, sometimes it's worse than never have, because then you see this greater reality, but it goes away, and you're left. It's kind of lost. So anyway, I studied transpersonal psychology, so I knew the literature of waking up and non-duality and all this stuff. So in the first week, I had this huge non-dual experience. And it was just like, oh my God, I'm enlightened. It's been a week. That's ridiculous. Part of me was saying, but what it did, like you were saying, Lynn, it after that, I went through 9 months of powerful releasing of the trauma that was keeping me depressed and sick and almost killing myself. And because I'd had this big, opening experience, it gave me a larger context, and it gave me the faith that it was really okay, and that I could go into the darkness, I could confront this stuff, I could even bless it, and that it would be okay, and that in some mysterious way, it would release and transmute. And each time I went into it, I knew there's kind of that knowing that it's okay, and that I'm actually healing, I'm getting better, and this is the work I'm supposed to be doing.
That's beautiful. My experience too is that deep meditation states are very healing in and of themselves. And also to be able to relax our body and to be able to work with the breath signals to our nervous system that we're safe.
Absolutely.
And then there's a lot of down regulation that happens during that practice. And when people aren't able to go into the deeper meditative states, it's often because there's so much anxiety in the mind, and the mind is like, woo all over the place. And so the technology that you're using, if that can help people to go deeply more quickly, that's
so helpful. Because most of us, unless we have really good teachers or maybe, lots of past lives preparing us or something like that, can't stick with a traditional meditative practice. Especially if we don't have we're not living in a monastery and we have a supportive structure. It's just, it takes too long and blah, 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 blah. With this technology, we find that many more people can stick with a meditative practice, and not only stick with it, but begin to feel the transformative results like almost immediately. And that's really encouraging. So that helps. And, in meditation, a friend of mine said, it's not what you think, right? And one of the biggest detriments to a meditative practice is we have a projected idea what it's supposed to be like, right? And meditation is what it's like, okay? So sometimes, meditation, I go into samadhi, these wonderful, beautiful thing where the ego structure just goes away, and I'm there in that goodness and love and bliss and connected to everything true. And sometimes I go to hell. I'm required to deal with not only my personal issues, but the suffering of the world and generations to come and past. And it's not what I thought, but I've learned over time with practice that yeah, it is what it is. And you just keep coming back. And God, what do you want me to do today? What's on the agenda? And I'll sit here and try to use the discipline and everything that you've given me over the last 12 years of doing this work, and be here today. So, by the way, this is one of my prayers. It's anything that I'm supposed to be seeing, doing, releasing, forgiving, you name it, please let me know. I'm here. I'm open. And don't be too subtle, because I'm kind of a thick skull and I'll miss it. So you know me better than I know myself. So let me know. Okay. I'm paying attention. And so, and oftentimes, not only do I get these kind of, insights, or these deep, beautiful, meditative experiences of God, or grounded being, or spirit, Allah, Buddha, nature, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. I also get kind of that wisdom voice that gives me my marching orders. This is what you need to do today. This is what you need to do, kind of a strategic overview. This is your purpose. And so a lot of my earlier life, I was a young man looking for his purpose and meaning, and it was like, God, if I don't, find something to do, a mission where I can contribute, I don't want to be alive. This is just a bunch of random BS, and I don't want to do it. So please. And I vision quested in, the wilderness, and eventually it began to come through that I did have something to share. It had something to give, and that's made all the difference.
That's so interesting. So do you want to talk a little bit about your wilderness experience and how that relates to what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, luckily I live right in the middle of wilderness. So I live in a town that has maybe less than 150 people up against a mountain, and, Red Rock Mountains and forests and deserts. And it's just wonderful for me, because I need it. And every day I take my dog, Lucy. I wake her up, especially right now, because we're right in the middle of summer. It's pretty hot. We're at 7,000 feet, so it's not brutally hot, but it's like 90 degrees. And she's a black dog, and, she absorbs the heat of the sun. So I get up really early, and I take her out in my 4-wheel drive outside of town and get on a dirt road and kick her out. And she starts running for about 1.5 miles every morning. And she's like, she's like 13 or 14, and she's in great shape. She's really healthy, and I feed her good stuff. But that gets me out every morning to bless the sunrise, And the light here just does incredible things at dusk and in the morning. And so every day I'm out there and I can say my prayers, and often at the end of the journey, I'll turn on my stereo, and I have satellite, radio. I'm a musician. I love music. I listen to music and play music a lot. And I'll open the door and have speakers, and I'll turn it on. I'll just be out there in the morning as the sun rises, dancing with my dog as a spiritual practice. And it's actually lovely. And there's not too many people around, so they don't see the madman dancing with his dog in the morning.
That's a great visual image, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, wilderness is where it is for me too.
Oh yeah, and also, I was a guide for years, and so we spent, sometimes I would spend up to 6 weeks with a group of people without ever going and seeing a city, going into town, just out there. And there's an amazing transformative power of the wilderness. And we've always, even when we were tribal people, and you seem like you live in the wilderness all the time, they would often send young men, especially, out on vision quests or endurances or something like that, where they're out alone and they find themselves, they find their power, they find their strength and their courage, they find their gifts, so they can come back to the tribe to be integrated as an adult and have their gifts to give back to their people. And yeah, women would do it too, but it was usually the ones that were specifically called medicine women. And I think the tribal people figured having children was enough of initiation into reality, anyway. So it just depended on the tribe. But yeah, and you notice that it's very helpful. And if you're suffering from depression or just these associative disorders and living in the madness of our culture, to get back to that and to live under the stars and experience a blizzard, in a cave or alcove and the sun and just all that shifts us in a really good way, and it gives us kind of a way to really examine and look at ourselves and find out who we are and what we're about. And we start finding out that maybe we're different than we thought we were. Maybe we're more than we thought we were. And of course, we did sweat lodges. And at the end, when I got to design my own programs, the experience would end. I mean, the crescendo would be a vision quest, a prayer fast, but for the person off by themselves, and then come and do a sweat lodge and pray together. It's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who are interested in recovery that go into recovery centers, that go into AA, that go into all these different, it's not just AA, there's 12-step groups for everything. There's a lot of different addictions. There's everything from shoe shopping and other ways to distract ourselves to heroin. And of all of the people that come to that, what is your feel on what is it that allows someone to really go deeply into the recovery, and what is it that holds people back from that?
Wow. Well, first of all, they want to do drugs. And they want to recover. The addict self wants to do drugs until they die. So there has to be something that breaks that downward spiral. And if you're an addict, almost by definition, you can't do it by yourself. If you could, you would be what I call a problem drinker, who, or for example, if drinking is the drug of choice, or alcohol is, and then you go, man, this sucks and it's not working for me, and then you can drink less or quit. You're calling the shots. But a addict by definition is powerless. They've lost the power to stop using these substances, even though they can see what it's doing to them and their world around them and the people that they should be caring about. And you need, people to take you, and it can be threat of jail, it can be threat of changing the locks. I mean, in the beginning, you can be pretty ruthless in your manipulation with some people. Now, some people come willingly, which is nice. Usually older people, or sometimes, in the wilderness programs, we get most people that want to be there. Like, hey, my parents, oh my God, I want to be here. They should be here. It's probably true, but you're here. So let's deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And so in the beginning, there could be a lot of resistance. But as the mind begins to clear up and, with the right practices and the right support, and first they have to trust you, and you say, well, you do care and you do love about them. And by the way, he seems to know what he's talking about. And then that, that shift, that reluctance begins to change. And it's like, you can imagine there's a big circle here, and in the latter progression of the disease, the addict self is the big circle, and the real self, the former self, the good enough self that loved his family and wanted to, basically do the right thing, is ever diminishing in its power and its presence, and the big self. And so in addiction, with the practices and stuff, you begin to shrink the power of the addict self. And, in the beginning, it's pretty dramatic, and the other self is trying to grow back. And so eventually what you want to do is the addiction, neurologically takes over the reptilian brainstem, and it's calling all the shots. So you want to get the control of your life back to the frontal cortex and neocortex that, thinks about, has values and, spirituality and what matters of this or that, calling the shots consciously instead of just being overpoweringly becoming a slave of these compulsions to get and use more drugs.
Right. You were talking about those 4 elements, and I think you got to 3, but I don't think you got to 4.
And 4, can you guess? It's a spiritual practice. Okay. And that's and of course, in the meditation, especially using this technology, all of this stuff is like, it really helps. Meditation with this brain entrainment technology helps all 4 lines. Okay. Physically, your brain is improving. So you get better at what you do. If you're a writer, you write better. If you're a musician, you play better. If you're a tennis player, such as I am, your tennis gets better because your brain is functioning at a higher level, and you tend to go into these flow states where you're in these creative. I'm writing now. I call them like superhuman powers. There's a lot of interest in these things now, and of course, we use these flow states in kind of in a mature spiritual fashion to serve our people, because it allows us to present the best of our gifts to give back to the world and in loving service to the all, right? And so that helps with the physical part. With the mental line or the intellectual line, your brain functions better. You have more focus. You can understand complex thoughts and ideas better. You're getting more intelligent cognitively. The emotional line, as we already talked about, you can also there's emotionally you're much more resilient. Now, I'm a passionate guy. I still get angry and go through this stuff, but I come back getting kicked on my butt for weeks. I'm back in, a half hour. It's like, well, I got through that, and here I am again. It's like those little, I don't know if they still have them, but there's little clown things with sand blowing up in the toy stores. You punch them and they keep coming back. There's tremendous emotional resilience that wasn't there before. And it's really good with that. And then, of course, in the spiritual, the technology and the practice facilitates deep spiritual experiences and these powerful state changes. And what we've learned in kind of integral practice is that it's these accumulation of these spiritual experiences and states that happen in the practice that become the building block to the higher stages of our own personal development, where we move up. And I mean, the developmentalists have been studying this for about 100 years now, but we move through, if we do the work, from very low pre-egoic stages to egoic morality. I only care about myself. Somebody in Washington reminds me of that right now, to where you care ethnocentric. You learn not just about you, but your group, your family, your species, your race. And obviously that has problems, because if you're not in that particular group, you're the subhuman, or you can be the enemy. And then you move into a world centric, where the realization comes, oh, wow, it's got to be yes, 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 yes for everyone. We all have to be winners in this. And to cosmocentric, where just the care and the love and the compassion extends to all creatures, the whole universe, everything. So anyway, the spiritual experiences helps us to move up there, but at the same time, it's doing the emotional work. And one of the biggest, train wrecks in spirituality is you get people that maybe do have a powerful spiritual realization, okay, but they haven't done their ego work. And so all their shadow and all their crap gets into it, and they end up being cult leaders and hurting people and projecting their shadows out on stuff. So it really takes, you have to really clean up and grow up as an egoic individual dealing with all that stuff, and you have to wake up. So there are two things that have to be taken care of there, and that's the spiritual thing. And what I tell people is, I have no dogmatic agenda, to make you a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Sufi or whatever, or a Buddhist. You can do whatever you want, in your interior journey. You may end up being a devout Christian or Buddhist or this, or you may be like the growing number of people, not religious but spiritual, but that's very much you. And I can tell you about my experience, and you can read the experience of others, and that's good to know. So when these things start happening, there's some reference, but basically you've got to ride your own horse, and you got to find your own truth and do that work. And, you got to find the ultimate ground of whatever it is, your ultimate concern. You have to find it in you, and the journey has always been an interior journey. So, and you do it every day, it gets easier.
Right. So fellowship and the fellowship of 12-step groups is well known to be an integral part of their success. And it's very clear that we need other people on this journey. And so how does that work with your integral recovery coaches? How does that work? I in my experience, one-to-one connection with someone who's present and trustworthy is very healing. And how does that work with your integral recovery coaches?
Well, in the part of the integral recovery model, we have 4 quadrants, okay? And the upper right quadrant, and these are just four basic dimensions that are always there in every occasion and have to be accounted for. So the upper right, and let's just talk about applying it to a human being who's an addict, is the physical body. Okay, there's been all kind of damage done to the physical body, lack of nutrition, meth that'll burn you up in 6 months until you're like this zombie, right? Heroin, all these different things. Okay, so we have to account for that. The upper left is the interior of the individual, and that's the emotional work, the shadow work, the releasing work, all of this stuff. So that has to be accounted for. The lower left is the we space, the community, okay? And oftentimes people get into using illegal drugs. Part of the high is not just the substance, but it's, wow, I got a new subculture. I belong to this, this group, this gang, we know, yeah, man, some good shit, blah, blah, blah. And that becomes part of it. So when you, when you get out of that, and in almost everything, if you're going to be really good, you have to get together with people who are like-minded, and hopefully there's a bunch of people in there that are better than you. So if you want to be a great guitar player, or a musician, you got to hang out and play with other musicians. If you want to be a spiritual person, that's why we've always come together in monasteries and religious groups and churches and temples. There's something about the support of the group that creates a very powerful field. AA certainly recognized that, okay? And they've done a terrific job, over the decades of supplying that. The thing about a bar, it's kind of ironic. What was that show, Cheers? So where they know your name, that kind of thing, sans the alcohol, right? But that's very good. So you have to, if the person can wrap their head around it, I think AA is a great thing. If you find a good group where you really feel supported and you're accountable, and they can help you if you've lost your license, they'll drive you around. There's so many good things there. Yeah, but the Sangha, the community, the support group is essential. And yeah, it's not the same. By the way, there's a real transmission. I don't know if you guys can feel it, but even on the internet, when we're in different places on the planet, there's a real transmission of love, energy, whatever that's come through here. But you need support. So you got to find that support group. And if, I tell some students, well, if you can't find it, build it. Make it happen. You got to build it, but you do need to find your friends, your accountability partners, the people that will stick with you. And it's just, it's essential. And also just neurologically, the brain chemical, when you go to a place where you feel accepted and loved and you get a hug and they see you and their faces light up, then you're just flooded with serotonin and dopamine and these feel good things. And you're like, oh yeah, my life is worth it. And the progression of addiction tends to make us more and more and more isolated, just like depression, which is often, fist and glove with addiction. And coming back and reconnecting with people. And then of course, there's a lot of repair work that has to be done that AA really, has accounted for. If you've hurt people, you got to clean up your mess, say you're sorry, give them back the money, do when you can. It's not always possible, but you do what you can to repair the damage you've done. Or karmically, you live your life in a way that you become a force for good and compassion and healing and honesty and honor in the world, as opposed to, a zombie crazed drug addict. It's a noble thing to aspire to.
Mm-hmm. So Kay and I work in a family support for the Kiloby Center for Recovery, and Kay's a psychologist and she works at it kind of from that point. And I also work as a facilitator around anxiety and some of the underlying emotional and the traumas, a lot of the underlying stuff as well. So we really see the importance of the families. And one thing Scott said within a few months of starting the Kiloby Center was that he could really see how important it is for that person, identified patient, to recover, is to have family support. And the families also have their own journey of recovery. And so a lot of especially what Kay does in the program is what is support, what is enabling, and what is enabling recovery. What's enabling recovery.
Once you kind of get it, you get it. But until you get it, it's like you don't got it. Yeah. And one of the things I did, one of the programs I started, Passage to the Recovery, for about 1.5 years, I was the graduation family specialist. So at the end of the program, the family would fly out, and I would do a 3.5-day workshop every week for about 1.5 years. And so, oh my God, it was so intense. I don't think I ever got through one without crying myself. And to see the hurt and the pain. And one of the practices we'd have the father and the son, and the whole family would do this, and the other families would be watching, sit together, and you'd have a list, and you put the 4 R's. So let's say they were resentments, regrets, respect, and request. So we start with resentments. Dad, I resent that you were never home when I was growing up. You know, and the father has to say back, he didn't get to go, well, son, while you were smoking pot, I was putting food and potatoes on the table. You know, you just have to repeat it back. And they have to look each other in the eye. And it's like, I mean, it gets amazing, you know. And then there's the regrets, you know. I regret, you know, the father, that I wasn't there for you when you were growing up, you know. And they get to feed that back. And then there are the respects, you know, son, and you're so brilliant. I just really respect that. And the son goes, wow, Dad, you know, it's powerful. And then, you know, you go through the request. What's your request? You know, I request that you know, stay sober, or you don't do this anymore. And it's a request. It's not a demand. But anyway, so yeah, I'm very familiar with that. And it was a large part of my work for a long time. And I think every good treatment program will definitely have a good, you know, portion of that. And of course, the families, I get them meditating and doing the work at home because they're just devastated by this, you know. And you're a parent. I mean, if you're a good parent, if you're just a jerk parent, you don't care, but not all parents are good. But, you know, most of the ones we saw were, you know, you care, you feel like such a failure. You know, how did this happen to my son or my daughter? You know, and there's just, and it brings up all your stuff and what you didn't get from your parents or what you did, and, you know, all this stuff. And then so everybody has to get involved on you know, on this journey of, you know, healing. It's really the only game in town if you want to live an authentically happy, you know, life. You got to work on yourself. Oh my God, you know, who would have thought? Oh.
John, what is your main methods for working on yourself?
Yeah, well, yeah, I've kind of got a balance to this. I try to, you know, they call it, when I was writing about integral theory, actually my book is Understandable, so I got the nickname Dumb It Down Dupuy, you know. So I try to make things simple and approachable. People can grasp it. And I would say an integral practice would be really good if you, I meditate about maybe an hour, 15 minutes to an hour and a half regularly every morning. Why? Because I'm such a mess, and that's what I found is my zone to get to where I need to be. But not everybody needs that or can do that. So if it's 20 minutes or this or that, but I would say if you really had a balanced life, you'd spend like 40 minutes a day involved in rigorous exercise. Okay. And we're talking about strength training. We're talking about yoga, cardio, all that stuff. It needs to be all included in there. And like I said, you want to get to your 10 every day. You want to push yourself to, you're sweating in your brain, you're there, you know, your body responds to that. And 40 minutes of interior work. Okay, so that's really an integral thing. You have to work on the outer, you have to work on the body, and you have to work on your emotional, spiritual life. And so if you could just do those two things, and my contention is if you use the technology and you use the right instructions and stuff, the 40 minutes a day easily becomes habitual. And you really want to do that. You want to make these practices become, you know, there's these stages of changes. Like, I don't want to change. Maybe I need to change. You know, okay, I got to change. You know, all right, I'll change until finally the point is like, this is just what I do. You know, nobody's going to stop me. I practice. So you work with people to get to that point where they're really engaged in the practice. And I have found very few instances where people have really achieved that mastery in the practice that they've relapsed or not continued just to grow into their lives and become, you know, more effective, better person. So yeah, 40 minutes on the interior, 40 minutes on the exterior, and you got something to, and well, that's a lot of time. So well, yeah, but you know, I mean, nobody's going to get great unless you're willing to put in the discipline and time to get great. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't happen. You got.
And what is the interior work?
Okay, well, I can tell you about mine. And this is, you know, I allow people, like a lot of people that engage with, you know, our technology are experienced meditators and already come from a tradition. They're Zen or Buddhist or this or that. I found in my own experience that just emerged out of my tradition. It's called centering prayer or centering meditation. And I thought I discovered this great new, you know, way to meditate. And I found out, oh God, there's thousands of years of this. So maybe I tapped into something there. But I just focus on my heart. And I just surrender myself to spirit, to God, to higher power, however you frame that. And then when the mind wanders, as it so wantingly does, you just have a word, a sacred word. It's not a mantra. You don't keep repeating, but you say thank you or amen or howdy or whatever, and just come back to your heart. Just center and center. Then finally, after a while, you get into this empty space. Just your mind slows down and you're in this place. And at that point, whatever needs to happen needs to happen. If you're just hanging out and getting your batteries recharged with the beauty of presence, contemplative prayer, and contemplative doesn't mean you're sitting there thinking about it. It means you're experiencing the divine, okay, in your practice. And then if you're supposed to do this thing or whatever it might be, or release this hatred or anger or something like that. And I find that in the course of 24-hour period, man, somebody pulls in front of you when you're driving or whatever, and you can build up all this stuff in 24 hours. And so when we meditate, it's like in the morning, we just clean all those little kind of residual impressions and stuff cleans up. And so we just keep the channel clear and open. And is that
yeah, I might be confused between, are you saying meditation and interior work are the same?
Yeah, in my book.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I thought they were saying they're two different things.
Yeah. To me, it's like emotional and spiritual. It's like, where does psychology, where does the psyche and the body, where's that dividing line? I've never seen it. So it's just a way of talking about things. So yeah, in the interior work, there's lots of stuff get done. You have new understandings about it's kind of a vision quest. You find out who and what you are, what you're supposed to be doing as an individual. You get to experience the divine, that you are part of this, and it is you at the deepest level, always has been, always will be. And healing from the past. And sometimes I even get into spaces where I'm dealing with pain that I don't even think is my own. I mean, a little part of it, you deal with collective pain. And the Buddhist practice of, breathing in, the pain of the world and loving kindness. Sometimes spontaneously, different practices will kick in that are appropriate to deal with the current state of your huge interior universe. And that's one of the things we find in the interior practice. We are vast. We are not these little things. When we get into the interior space, we're connected to the infinite, and so there's lots of space and lots of room and a lot of work to do.
So, how has your work changed over the years? You've mentioned several phases.
Well, yeah, it's like, I was a wilderness guide. Then I started figuring out this integral recovery thing, and that became a big focus. And then I focused on about the last 7 years, largely on iAwake technologies and bringing these tools and creating these tools to get to people to help them with these integral practices and make transformative meditation available to many, many more people. We're democratizing this transcendent practice. And I think before, maybe a few people in each generation would make it, and then we'd go to the ashram or go to the temple or whatever and hang out with them and kind of ride on their coattails. But with this, I think we all have the capacity to become mystics in our own lives. And that's tremendous. And then just recently, it's like ding, 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 the integral recovery thing has really come back on. I got a great team together to do start the podcast, and it has been really well received. And we get into such amazing flow states when we're talking. It's just like after it's over, we're just like, whew, what the heck happened there? It's funny, it's tragic, it's beautiful, it's informative, it's wise, it's just amazing. So that has really started to come back online now. It's time. And I have colleagues that are working with me that I just adore and respect, and I think they're brilliant. And so that's, and to me, in my business, maybe some of my colleagues always want to separate iAwake from, well, that's IR, integral recovery. To me, it's all the same thing. I never divided it at all. It's all part of the same movement.
So how does one find iAwake? How do you use it? How do you find it?
Yeah, just Google iAwake Technologies. It's really simple. We have a really great website we've been working on for years. We have a really large library now of transformative audio tools to help you. And we've just released one this last week. It's called Stealing Flow. And it's designed not for the deep meditative states. We've got tons of that stuff, but to put you warm up your mind, to put you in creative zones and flow states when you're actually doing work and stuff. And I've been using those recently, and they're tremendous. I started writing the new book finally. I hemmed and hawed, and now I'm in it. I'm in the flow of writing the book, and it's exhilarating. That's one thing about flow states. They're static, ecstasis. You're kind of out of your, the confines of your little ego self, and you're in this zone, and it's just like coming through. And so I'm engaged in that now. So yeah. And we have a weekly teleseminar. on Wednesdays, and you can find that on the website if you have questions about how to use the technology. And usually Doug Prater and he's our communications director. We'll talk about some stuff that's up in our own practice and what's going on, with iAwake, and that'll, be for a few minutes, and then we just invite people to ask questions and talk. So we try to be very, very supportive. And if persons are really having problems, like deep depression or trauma, stuff like that, I'll just say, let's talk on Skype, and pro bono. I'll just talk, as long as we need, and help and support them in that way. So we're small, but we're very personal, and it's growing. It's been really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm really happy we've had this chance to talk about this and hear you talk about it more. So if you were to sum it all up, what I've been kind of seeing from this is it's holistic. It covers all the bases, mind, the body. A lot of it is so somatic. Covers trauma. It covers, there's a technology that helps us really go deeply into meditation, which is healing on its own. So what would you say for someone who's either just wanting to go into recovery or who's wobbling a bit? What are the really key things that somebody might be able to go into now?
Well, obviously, by definition, if you're an addict and it's progressive, there's a progressive loss of control. There's a progressive loss of sanity until it ends up in, death or prison or something awful, is to get help. That's the first step, and get over I can do it myself. You can't,
Right.
you fall on your face enough. So get help and get the best help you can. And there's a lot of, this whole series you guys are doing is about, there's a lot of emergent, really good stuff that's coming that's giving, it's giving us more hope, and it's giving us better results. It may not be 100%, but gosh, the standards for normal treatment was like 10%. That was pretty much that would actually, maintain long-term recovery. And now maybe we're pushing it to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. But be humble, be willing to let somebody, a wiser, a more experienced person, take over for a while, because you can't trust your addict self. It wants you to die, and you'll regain your own life. So use the most skillful means possible, and be humble, and work as if your life depended on it. Seriously take this stuff into account and do the work, and you will get better. And not only, it's not just about recovery or getting to what you were, but it really gets exciting when with ongoing practice we begin to evolve, and we move into self-actualization, which means becoming the best version of yourself and giving back, giving your essential gifts into the world, which is, part of authentic happiness. It's very important. And then there's the self-realization. As you go deeper into your own spiritual practice, you begin to realize, what you are at your depth, and what this is all about, and discovering, the ultimate ground of being. And you put those two things together, and that's a great freaking story. It's just amazing. Does that make any? I hope that answered the question.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Wondering if you have a favorite quote.
Well, there's one that from Abraham Maslow, which I thought it's very short, and I was thinking about it being the title for the next book. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's what we can become, we must become. Okay. And that trumps merely, dealing with the disease and everything. There is a spiritual evolutionary responsibility that knowing what we know and having the knowledge and the tools that we have now, that we become what we can become, because we're doing it for those who came before us. We're doing it for those who are with us now, and we're doing it for the generations to come. I think that's an incredibly powerful moral place to, plant your flag and do what you have to do to get done what you need to get done.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, John. This has been inspiring.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. I've been interviewing people a lot. We did this thing, Spiritual Talks, and I'm like, interviewed so many freaking people in the last, couple of years, and occasionally I get interviewed, but it's kind of nice to change the perspective. And yeah, it was great. I had a good time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for watching. Go to Kiloby.com, Radical Recovery Summit 2017, for the full schedule of speakers.